We are in week 2 of our series, The Life of Daniel, where we've been looking at this young man's life and figuring out what in the world can we learn from him as he was this teenage boy that was stolen from his land, brought into an exiled land of Babylon that was nothing like he expected, and somehow thrived and lived an amazing life of influence. And so I'm excited that we can kind of do this together. But before we jump into that, the question I'd like to just pose to you is, have you ever made a mistake? Okay, good. No, perfect. I'm praying for your marriage. Listen, I've made plenty of mistakes, lots and lots of them. And, it's funny that when I think about that, one of the things that came to mind, it was actually this morning in one of the conversations I was having with someone here from Crossbridge. It dawned on me, there was a time when I was in my late 20s, and I was working at a church, and I was the youth pastor at the church, and I had, that job, I had another job, and I had, 3 kids that were under, 4 at that time, all of them, or 3 kids under 3 at one point. And it was just this is crazy, all these things that were going on. And I found myself, while I was at work, making some mistakes. And, it could have been I was late on emails. It could have been that game wasn't planned well, or that message was a bomb, don't do that again. There was all sorts of things. But I remember every time it happened, I'd be called into, my manager or boss's office, and he would kind of let me know what the mistake was and try to correct it. And I'm like, all right, I'll do better. I'll fix this. I'll do that. But I always had a set of excuses that I could go to. Man, but don't you see how busy I am? Don't you know what it's like with all of these responsibilities emotionally and spiritually and all these things? And I had my list of excuses that I could use, and I could, in my own head, justify why I made the mistake. At the same time, that boss who I would justify my own mistakes to would make mistakes. And I had very little grace for those mistakes. Very little understanding as I looked up, going, how could you make a decision so fast? You haven't thought about this. Or if he made a decision fast, man, you didn't think about that. You need to give this more time. It kind of seemed like I had a way of justifying my own mistakes and yet not recognizing his. And I think this is important for us to pick up this morning, that have you ever made a mistake? Because I think in the life of Daniel, one of the things that we're going to learn in these keys to thriving in Babylon is that it's not only us who make mistakes, but it's everyone around us who makes mistakes. And while it's very true that the lives that we live and what we carry is a lot, sometimes it's easy to forget that the people we work for, the people that we serve, the people who are over us in authority have lives that impact their jobs, their places of work, and in the home, and they make mistakes too. How in the world can we, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, live in a world where it's okay not just for us to make mistakes, but to have the grace for our bosses to make mistakes? That's where it gets a little rough. I'd like to look at the life of Daniel today and kind of pull out some keys to thriving in Babylon in a world where, let's just be real, there's plenty of mistakes. Not just from Daniel, but what we realize is from this king of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. And if you weren't with us last week, the very quick recap is Daniel, as a teenager, was identified as one of the most handsome, well-put-together, intelligent men, young men in Jerusalem. And what Babylon does is they pull the best of the best. They always know quality when they see it. They bring them home, which is 2 months' journey away from Jerusalem, and they leave the scraps back in Jerusalem. They do this with every nation. They take the best, they bring them in. Then they give them the best education. They school them on everything. They school them on all the Babylonian culture, their traditions, astrology, astronomy, law, religion, math, logic, and this really hard language that they all spoke. They were the best. They got to eat the best food. They had the best logic. They were so taken care of for the first 3 years that they were part of Babylon. And the whole point of it was, we're going to educate you, and we're going to get you to the best place we can, because ultimately, you're going to serve the king in his palace, and we need to make sure that his servants are the best. And so that's why we're doing this. And it made sense, right? You want to give them a great culture, help them understand everything so they can serve the king as best they could. And Daniel went through this process, and we find at the end of chapter 1, where we left it last week, that the king, after, Daniel chooses to try a different diet without making a big scene about it, the king notices something about him. He is so impressed with Daniel. And what it says at the end, it says that the king found him 10 times more capable than anybody else in his class, basically. Any of the other magicians that were around and the enchanters who were around, this guy Daniel was different. And while he's different, he's still a side. And the king has a problem. It's not that he caused a problem. It's more that it came to him. If you jump into chapter 2, verse 1, it says this about King Nebuchadnezzar. One night during the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. He called his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. And as they stood before the king, he said, "I have had a dream that deeply troubles me, and I must know what it means." Now, this for us, like, we have bad dreams sometimes, we have nightmares, I get it. But in Eastern culture, then and now, very much so, dreams are a huge deal. Dreams carry a lot of weight, and you pay attention when you have dreams. And so the king has such a terrifying dream, he cannot sleep. He's like, this is bugging me out, and it's so overwhelming. And so here's what happens when we get into those places, when something gets to us so deep, we begin to look for help wherever we can find it, right? We just need to know that we're not alone in this issue, that there's someone else who can understand it. And so he begins to look for help anywhere that he can. He's finding magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, astrologers. And what's funny about Babylon is Babylon has so much help. But we're going to see that it does King Nebuchadnezzar no good. There's help to be had, but it's not the help that he needs. But in these verses right here, we find one of the keys that we need to have if we're going to survive in Babylon, in this world that we live in. The key is to remember the authorities we serve can be anxious over issues we can't see. Remember that the authorities that we serve can be anxious over things that we can't see. Right? Could you imagine running the most influential, largest kingdom in the known world at that time? Your kingdom is constantly expanding, which means increased expenses, more education all around. And then if you're continuing to move up in authority, you've got to have a heightened sense of security around you because you don't want someone coming to assassinate you. You got to secure your throne, so you got to make sure that you're managing the rumors of riots and uprisings and the people who are like, "Oh, we should," and you're like, "No, we don't want to do that." But you're finding these great people. How do you both raise up people and push people down? And there's so much going on. And then let alone, you're trying to love your wife, so you're building this giant garden that's an ancient wonder of the world, and you got family life, you got work, you got social. Do you even have friends if you're the king, or is everybody out for something from you? There's so much going on. Can I tell you the same thing is true about our bosses and our teachers and the people in authority over us? That they have so much going on in their lives that you and I cannot see, and they will show up to work and they will show up to a place, and we think that they're showing up just for this. This is what it is, right? But there's a lot of life that they're carrying in that we cannot see. Now, when we make a mistake, we know it's because I'm carrying a lot of life, but we don't always extend that grace up. Listen, if you carry a position where you have authority, I just want to say I see you, and I know that you carry a lot into that. And no one sees that. No one knows the time that you're trying to figure out how to spend time with your kids, how to spend time, with your parents, how to spend time with friends, how to manage a budget when everything's going up, but except your paycheck. I get that. And it's to think that it wouldn't affect what we do and how we live life is ridiculous, isn't it? But for some reason, we don't treat each other like that. We treat each other like these things shouldn't matter. If you carry these things, can't they? right? Just because someone has a title or some position, it doesn't mean that they're exempt from the difficulties of life. We all have this. The king is feeling it. And so what he does is he calls for help. I'm distressed at this dream. What should I do? And it picks up at verse 4 and it says, then the astrologers answered the king in Aramaic. Aramaic is like the super common language that everybody spoke. It's, long live the king. Tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. Jumping to verse 8, the king replied, I know what you're doing. You're stalling for time because you know that I'm serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you're doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I'll change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means. Right? The king is great. He's got these issues. He's like, my problem is I had a dream, but I know how you work, and you're going to work to tell me what I want to know. So before you can get to this place, because I'm so stressed, I need you to understand what I'm stressed about. Tell me my dream. That's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? I don't know what you dream like, but very rarely am I think someone's going to be able to tell me the things that I dream. Right? I have trouble writing some of those things down. I'm like, I have a rocket pack? Like, cool. And then I powered up and that. Yeah, you're not telling me that stuff. Right? And the king knows what they're out to do. They're out to tell him lies so they can preserve their jobs. Right? What we know is that the king, when people honor him and work hard, he elevates them. But when they lie to him and when they abuse or cannot do the job, he doesn't demote them, he kills them. Right? It's either high elevation or death. That's what you do. So you just lay low. But now he's put all these magicians and enchanters on point. He's like, I need you to tell me what this is. And they really do want to help, right? They want to help. Because if the right person helps, they know they're going to be elevated. Big promotion. And so they're driven in this moment when either the motivation is greed, I can move up, or fear, I don't want to die. And greed and fear are two of the biggest motivators in Babylon. That's what makes people do what they do. In the world around us today, fear and greed are the things that drive our culture and our nation. And they are still very, very powerful incentives for people to make the decisions that they make. Right? Give me what I ask for, and I will make you wealthy, or if you fail, you will suffer. And this is how a lot of our jobs roll. This is how our culture tells us. And this kind of management, when we live in a culture like this is going to be stressful for everybody, isn't it? It's going to be so stressful. And what do people do when you're stressed out and driven by fear or greed and you can't get what you want? Just jump on Facebook. You and I, what do we do as a culture? We complain. And we don't just complain, we complain publicly. We want it to be known how ridiculous this is. And that's exactly what the astrologers do. In verse 10, it says, the astrologers replied to the king, no one on earth can tell the king his dream. And no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. Right? King Nebuchadnezzar, you're nuts. What you're asking is so stupid and so ridiculous, no one in history would ask something like this. And so they're letting it be known to the king, and they're letting it be known to the world around them. They aren't happy. I didn't sign up for this thing. You know, it's funny when we have an experience with any business. Forbes magazine is great. They say if you have a great experience with a business, you're likely going to share that experience with about 9 people. But if you have a bad experience with that same business, you are likely to share that with 16 people. So, you know, when you're getting hounded with emails about good reviews and review us, it's because most people don't share the good experience they had, but we love to share the bad, don't we? We love to complain about things. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. Man, could you believe they were that rude when I was at the counter? And I will tell you, I'm guilty of this. If I had to think about the good things that I share and the bad things that I share, I think I'd fall into that Forbes number, unfortunately, sometimes, that I'm more likely to share my bad experiences, and even if it's, well, I don't want them to experience it. I really think it's just so I know I'm heard, and it really is a bad thing. And so we complain, and I need to tell you that is not a biblical response. When the king of Babylon is all worked up, complaining about him is not going to help our cause. If we want a biblical response to an angry king, a frustrated king, we can just go to what one of the kings of Israel said. King Solomon wrote Proverbs, and he had these great Proverbs that he wrote down, these nuggets of wisdom that Chris, who not only is on our setup and teardown team, but he's one of our amazing CB youth leaders. In Proverbs, it says very easy that a gentle answer deflects anger, but harsh words make tempers flare. And the anger of a king is a deadly threat. The wise will try to appease it. Remember from last week, never put a king in a position where he has to prove he's king. If we're not happy, complaining about it publicly is never going to solve the problem. It's only going to make the king more angry. He's employed all these magicians, these astrologers, enchanters, people from all over the world, from every nation that he has conquered and brought in. And instead of doing the job that they were hired to do, now they're calling out the king. What do you expect is going to happen? They put the king in a position to prove his power. And so finally he's like, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to prove my power. All of you enchanters, wise men, astrologers, all you people that I've hired, I've educated, all of this, I'm so frustrated at your games that you're playing, I'm going to kill you all and start over. Bit extreme, don't you think? And not just the people who are in the room going, come on, we'll tell you, give us a little hint of your dream, and we'll kind of... No, he says across the nation, if you fell into the camp of wise men or enchanter or magician or astrologer, you all just need to die. The whole lot of you is the worst. I'm done. We're going to start over. And this is huge. So the king rallies his troops, and he sends them throughout Babylon to find all the wise men and everybody and to kill them. Do you remember what Daniel was associated with? He was a wise man. He was considered a magician. And so Daniel, sitting at home with his boys, just kind of hanging, and they're talking about maybe, do you remember that meal, or do you remember that lesson? They're doing their thing, and all of a sudden there's a knock at the door, and it's one of the king's, troops. It's like, hey, guys, what do you do in that moment? You don't know why they're here. You don't know what's going on. Now, listen, when we're in Babylon, you can pay for mistakes that you never made. Someone else's mistakes can come down the line and we pay for that. Someone else can pay for the mistakes that we make. That's just part of being in Babylon. And so in verse 14, we read this. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened, and Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. If we want to thrive in Babylon, we pick up something from Daniel here. Start your conversations with grace and curiosity. Start your conversations with grace and curiosity. Maybe there's something you don't know that's going on. Daniel, all of a sudden in this moment, doesn't start demanding his rights. Instead, he offers to go help the king with the problem. He does it very tactfully with this messenger of the king. He doesn't question the king's authority to do. And this is a crazy, crazy command, isn't it? Can we agree on that? This is nuts. And he doesn't stop and say to the messenger, do you realize how crazy the guy you're serving is? Who would say such a thing? No, he doesn't say that at all. He says, what's the king's problem? I'd like to go to him. Why? I'd like to see if I can help. And that's what he does. He goes to the king. The king says, I need you to tell me what the deal is. And Daniel's like, okay, can I have a little time, though, to figure this out? Can I have a little time? And what he does next, I think, changes everything. It's such a lesson for us. He goes home. He tells his three friends what's going on, about what the king wants. And then he goes to the only one who could provide the answer. He goes to God. And they begin to pray. This is a key to thriving in Babylon. We have to know how to pray when we're in a tight spot. Know how to pray when you're in a tight spot. Right? They asked God, what was the dream? And what did They didn't ask God when they went to pray. How didn't they pray? They didn't pray, oh God, take down this crazy king. Oh God, change the heart of this king to make him not treat people this way. They didn't complain about the king. Oh God, he's so stupid, this king. How could you make someone so stupid? They didn't do any of this. What did they do? They asked God for his mercy and to provide an answer to the king's problem. The king is stressed about a dream, so God, can you tell us what that dream is and tell us what it means so we can help the king calm down and de-escalate this? They weren't trying to solve their own problem. They were out to solve the king's. Isn't that interesting? When you're in a tight spot, how you pray in that spot really matters. Are you praying against someone, or are you praying to help them, and are you for them? And what's great is God answers Daniel. Daniel receives the dream. He receives the interpretation of that dream. He goes to the king. And what I love is, instead of like strolling up, that when you solve that problem at work that's pretty big that everybody's wrestling with, and you're like, oh, I got it. And you can kind of roll up going, yep, I'm the man or woman, That's not what Daniel does. Daniel doesn't roll in going, I'm the only one who's got this. I'm the only one who could have done this thing. He walks in and he tells the king straight to his face, he goes, what you were asking of all of these astrologers and magicians and enchanters was impossible. No one could have given you the answer to this, not even me. But the good news is God can. And I know that God. And he has told me your dream. And he has told me what it means. Daniel isn't elevating himself. He's elevating God. What he's also doing is he's saving the life of every wise man and magician that are his co-workers. When God gives us wisdom, it is our job to share it. And Daniel does this, and he does it humbly. He reveals the dream and interpretation. He isn't condescending. He isn't lecturing. He's not preachy. What Daniel does is he stays in his lane. He doesn't get out of it because he doesn't know the king that well. The king's got a problem. I've got your answer. Here's what God says. What the king wants to do with that is up to him. It's not his job to tell the king what to do, is it? He just helped solve the problem that the king had. That was it. If the king wants his opinions, he can ask for it. And at the end of chapter 2, this is what we read. In verse 46, it says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him. And he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, Truly, your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over all kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret. And then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court. Talk about a turnaround, right? Let's go kill everybody to, he got it. He solved the impossible problem. I need you in the court with me. Your boys can take care of Babylon. I'm glad. If you think they're good, I'll trust you, but I need you here. You stay with me. And so they begin to have this relationship together, and instead of death for everybody, we've got promotions. Did you ever go into one of them meetings expecting to get wrecked, and then someone's like, no, this is great. We're giving you this. And you're like, what? You don't even remember the conversation, do you? Because you expected to get wrecked. That's not what this is. What this shows is that when there's true wisdom that our bosses, our teachers, our coaches have, when there's a real problem that they have, and we can help them find a solution to that problem, it brings so much peace to their life. That this is something that weighs on them. And our job is not to fix the problem so that we look good. It's to help them. The motivation behind that is hugely different. Are you with me on that? I think too often we do things so that we look good when if there's a problem, we help solve it, not for our purpose, but it helps them. That's what service looks like. And that's the key to thriving in Babylon. Never underestimate the power of God's wisdom when it's received by an honest doubter. God's word is filled with so much wisdom that our world needs. I'm going to guess maybe there's conflict where you work or there's conflict at your lunch table or where you go to school. to tell you, this gives you a lot of wisdom about conflict. Someone comes complaining to you and frustrated, and they're like, what am I supposed to do? And it's like, tell you what, why don't you just go talk to them one-on-one? Oh, that's a great idea. Where did you ever think of that? Just the little thing that a guy named Jesus said, Matthew 18. You don't even have to go into that, but you'll seem so great. What? No, it's God's wisdom. It's going to help things get better. When people are really searching and we can help point them to God's wisdom, it'll be received. And so Daniel elevates his friends. And it's funny that the one who took them away, the one who enslaved them, the one who took over their land and all that is the one who's now promoting them to this place. And it's absolutely amazing. And these 4 men would spend their careers serving in Babylon. These 4 men will skip the story of, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the furnace, because it's a unique story. But it's funny because the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had before, where he needed help, the situation repeats itself again for the king. And I'll tell you this, the people that we serve, the people that we work for, the people that we study under, sometimes the same problem keeps coming back. And we think that we've solved it, and we think that we can help them fix it, but did you ever stop and go like, man, I thought we dealt with this already. Why is it coming back? Because problems surface again. That's part of life, isn't it? They just keep coming back. And we have to remember that when we're sitting in Babylon, one of the keys to thriving that we have to remember is no matter our role, our job, or our lack of position, we can serve the Lord faithfully by doing our job well, trusting that God and his faithfulness, even our bosses, that even our bosses make stupid decisions. Like, they're going to make bad calls, and our job, stay consistent with serving the Lord. Work hard for them like we're working for God, and that's what we do. We don't hear anything about Daniel for about 30 years. So for 30 years, he stays in the king's court and does nothing until this dream issue comes back. And in that time, do you know what he's doing for 30 years? Whatever the king asks him to do, I bet you. Whatever his job was, that's what he did. And in chapter 4, we simply find the same situation, where the king, he now writes himself, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity, and one night I had a dream that frightened me. I saw visions that terrified me as I laid in my bed. Oh my gosh, seriously, king? Like another terrifying dream? Like, you got to stop, killing nations. Maybe this will stop. Stop taking everybody over. Stop doing these things. But you know what? It's okay. It's okay. The last time this happened, the king made a mistake in the way that he handled it. Maybe things will be different this time. Maybe they'll be different, right? Well, in verse 6 it says, the king writes, so I issued an order calling all the wise men of Babylon so that they could tell me what my dream meant. When all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers came in, I told them the dream. Okay, cool, so he's not making them guess anymore. He tells them the dream. But they couldn't tell me what it meant. Oh, gosh. Bosses can be frustrating sometimes, can't they? Amen. Amen. To the staff at Crossbridge, amen, I get you. I get you, same problems. Are we doing this again? Yeah, I don't know why. We just get into habits that are bad, and I get it, oh my gosh. But this issue, whatever it was, has the king really shook this time to where he's like, I'll tell you the dream. I just need to know what the heck this means because I'm done. It says he's terrified. When we're in those situations, we go back to patterns that worked for us in the past, maybe, but we begin looking for help in the same places. And just because someone has some title or some, authority in a place doesn't mean they're the expert in it. And so, we've got all these wise men and enchanters and astrologers. Does that mean they're the experts? No, but the king has said, it's your job, it's your title, so I'm going to go there for your role. That's not where wisdom's always going to lie. It's just not always in the title. And so in verse 8, after he goes through all these people, it says, at last, this is the king writing again, at last, Daniel came in before me, and I told him the dream. He was named Belshazzar, after my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. I said to him, Belshazzar, chief of magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too great for you to solve. Now tell me what my dream means. Did you notice what the king called Daniel here? What did he call Daniel? Belshazzar. Okay, so he's calling him by his Babylonian name. And then what's his title? Chief of Magicians. Chief of Magicians. Now, in the Hebrew culture, magicians and enchanters are not followers of Jesus, or followers of Yahweh. They do not follow God. This is not part of their faith. This is evil and against God. They're frauds. And God tells his people have nothing to do with people like this. But Daniel is now being called the chief of magicians. And what I love about him is he doesn't look at the king and go, no, not me. That's not my name. That's not my title. I think he knew the king was ultimately trying to compliment him in his own language. And this is the key for us to thrive is, please, I beg you, don't be offended at what you are called. Do not be offended at what you are called. Just stay focused on serving as if you were serving the Lord. A title will not define who you are. A position will not define who you are. If your boss keeps calling you by the wrong name, you can correct them if it's your real name. But your title doesn't really matter as long as how you're working is consistent. And so Daniel, the chief of the magicians, is seeing the king. He's carrying all this weight, and he's like, all right, just tell me your dream. And that's what the king does. He tells him the dream, and he listens to the dream, and he knows what the dream means. Oh, no. If you jump to verse 19, it says this, upon hearing this, Daniel, also known as Belshazzar, was overcome for a time. He was frightened by the meaning of the dream, and the king said to him, Belshazzar, don't be alarmed by the dream and what it means. Belshazzar replied, I wish the events foreshadowed in this dream would happen to your enemies, my lord, and not you. Can you see the relationship these guys have? 30 years. You can let Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego take care of this. I want you in my court. And now, finally, we get this. And Daniel heard me. And finally, he showed up. And he explains, he tells the dream. And as Daniel is hearing it, I'm sure the king is looking at his face because he knows something bad is happening. And the king says, please don't hide this from me. We've got a relationship here. I can see that there's something you have to tell me what this means. I can see it's weighing on you. And in this great love, Daniel or Belshazzar looks at his king and he's like, I wish this was for anybody else. I wish this was for your enemies. I wish this wasn't for you. Oh man, can I tell you, this is such a heart that is needed for today. Our bosses, our teachers, the people that we serve, they need us praying more for them. And they need us working hard for them to succeed. They need for us to know that we're working for their success and that we care about them. Not that we're working against them and praying against them. This dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, very simply summed up, is what Daniel had to tell him is, if you're not careful, the God of all creation and ruler of every kingdom sees you and your pride, and if things don't turn, you're going to go so crazy. You're going to leave this city, go into the fields around the city, and behave like an animal. You're going to eat the grass of the field like everybody else. 7 years, you will stay out there, and you'll lose your kingdom in that time. Could you imagine delivering that news to your boss? Like, ugh. But I think he's built such a relationship of care that when he said, I wish I could tell this to anybody else, I think King Nebuchadnezzar believed him. And when King Nebuchadnezzar heard it, he had an opportunity. How did he want to respond? What did he want to do? And this is kind of where I think Daniel takes the opportunity. Because he's been in the king's court, when you spend time faithfully serving someone, you are given different access. And so this is the only time we read about him offering a suggestion to the king. And he kind of suggests, he says this in verse 27, King Nebuchadnezzar, please accept my advice. Stop sinning and do what's right. Break from the wicked past and be merciful to the poor. Perhaps then you will continue to prosper. Right? He was just saying to the king, there is an opportunity here. In a moment when you're stuck and you don't know what to do, do you know what you do to thrive in Babylon? You take the next right step. You do the next right thing. And that's all Daniel does. He offers this chance for the king, saying, maybe if you turn to God now, this won't happen. And that's really the key here, is we are responsible for doing the next right thing with love and compassion. If you don't know what to do in a situation and you are stuck, you're stuck at work, you're stuck at school, you're stuck at home, you're like, what am I supposed to do? Lord, what am I supposed to do? Maybe we could just stop, pause, and ask, Lord, what is the next right thing that I can do with loving compassion here? How can I respond with loving compassion in this moment? Daniel's not responsible with what the king does with this, and the king doesn't follow it. He doesn't listen. Actually, he goes 12 months ignoring the advice from Daniel. And we find this moment in verse 30 where it says, as he looked out across the city, he said, look at this great city of Babylon. By my own mighty power, I've built this beautiful city and my royal residence to display my majestic splendor. If you're a student of history, you know that the moment things get really good in any nation, that's the moment things will never turn for a king. Right? They're not going to repent when things are at their peak. When someone's at the peak of leadership, do they want to step down? No, they want to solidify leadership. Why would you listen to something like this for Daniel? And yet, it's so funny because at the peak of his kingdom, there's a word that leaders love to use. Actually, there's two of them, me and I. Anything that can point it back to, look what I have done. Look at my kingdom, and we take possession over all of this. And that's the moment God goes, that's cute. And he goes crazy. Literally goes crazy, and he goes out into the field. He starts eating grass like a wild man. My guess is people in Babylon are like, be careful, the king. Like, you can go see him out there. Like, it's maybe a cage. Like, oh, man. He became the story that they told inside the city of do what's right or you end up like that guy. And for 7 years, he lost everything. He lost it all. And finally, after those 7 years, his sanity does return. He snaps out of it. He recognizes that God is king. He finally gets it. There's this huge change in his heart. And when he gets it, God restores his honor. God restores his glory. God restores his kingdom. And he had really changed. But for those 30 years, Daniel's consistent. He does the next right thing. And here's the key that we have to understand after the king comes back. No matter who is above us, what we need to understand is that your boss and your teacher needs Christ more than you need a new boss or teacher. We got to stop praying people out of positions and start praying for them in positions. Are you with me? Let's stop praying people out of spots and start praying for them in that spot. How we pray for them is really going to matter. How we represent Christ to them is really going to matter. Are we working hard for them to solve their problems, or are we working harder to get a promotion and a title for us so that we can make more money, so that we can feel more important about our title, so that we can, or are we just asking God, what is the next right thing to do here? What is the next right thing in this moment? You see, King Nebuchadnezzar was the one that everybody hated, and this man was humbled by God and turned his life around. I guarantee you he went back into that city and was like, Daniel, I get it. Teach me about Yahweh. Teach me about your God that I have seen. I understand him. I want to know him. It completely changed the entire kingdom. I mean, I'm serious. The entire kingdom changes after this moment. It's a different kingdom. Not because King Nebuchadnezzar was gone, but because he had turned his life over to God. How do you represent Jesus in your school? In your neighborhood? At work? How do you pray for your neighbors? For your parents? For your teachers? Your managers, your bosses? How do you pray for our government officials? You didn't like that one, did you? How we pray matters. This means we're going to have to be content as followers of Jesus to serve regardless of who's over us. Work for the good and the peace of our kingdoms. And give Christ every opportunity to change us to be the most humble servants. Because when we are consistent where we are, we gain a voice that's trusted, when our employers, bosses, and teachers know that we are for them, I guarantee you they come to us because they know we're not going to badmouth them. They know we're not trying to steal their jobs. We can work for their good. And that goes against our culture so much right now. I get it. Welcome to following Jesus.